Your Excellency, the President of the Republic of Fiji, Ratu Epeli Tikau, Your Excellencies from Diplomatic Corps, invited guests, ladies and gentlemen. I have a very dry topic, and my topic is to actually talk to you about the constitutional provisions that has already been alluded to by His Excellency our President in the Fijian Constitution regarding the issues that we are here to discuss today, and which is of course of critical importance. Before I start, I'd like to actually specifically read section 26.3 of the Fijian Constitution, and that reads, "A person must not be unfairly discriminated against, directly or indirectly, on the grounds of his or her actual or supposed personal characteristics or circumstances, including race, culture, ethnic or social origin, color, place of origin, sex, gender, sexual orientation, gender identity and expression, birth, primary language, economic or social or health status, disability, age, religion, conscience, marital status, or pregnancy." As you can see, it's a very wide range of grounds which are specifically spelled out where unfair discrimination cannot take place in Fiji. The law, of course, has not always been this case. These provisions in the Constitution are very new. As you know, His Excellency our President, in fact, put in place the new Constitution on the 7th of September in 2013, and this Constitution has been in place now for nearly 2 years, and it has provided the fundamental basis of non-discrimination in Fiji. I'd like to highlight a couple other issues. The MC today, of course, is a Human Rights Commissioner from the Human Rights and Anti-Discrimination Commission. When this Constitution was specifically put together, those of you who know a bit about constitutional history in Fiji would know that under the previous Constitution we simply had a Human Rights Commission. It was not a Human Rights and Anti-Discrimination Commission. So by having a Human Rights Commission that is also specifically addressing anti-discrimination, we are in fact widening the net of discrimination based not only on what we may call the upper levels of human rights discrimination, but also the everyday level, and I'd like to highlight that to you a lot more specifically later on. But as you can see from the provision I've just read out, that the net is much wider now, and of course it includes the issues pertaining to the LGBTIQ community in Fiji, and of course we are hoping that it will provide jurisprudence for the other Pacific Island countries. As is highlighted in the video, still a number of Pacific Island countries in fact criminalizes, for example, homosexuality. What is really interesting is that most of our laws in fact have been inherited from Britain. And in the Victorian legislation, the Victorian way of thinking, women of course could not be homosexuals, because it was only male homosexuality that was criminalized. I'd like to read out to you what was the penal code provision in Fiji only until about 2009. So essentially what it said, if any man permitted another male person to have carnal knowledge of him, quote, against the order of nature, unquote, he would risk a sentence of up to 15 years imprisonment, with or without corporal punishment, usually administered by the use of the birch. So you could actually be locked up for nearly 15 years, and you would actually be caned or whipped or whatever the case may be, depends on how you interpret the birch. There was a case in Fiji in 2005 that in fact, vis-a-vis the provisions in the then Constitution, said that this particular law was unconstitutional. But notwithstanding that ruling, the fact is it still remained in the penal code in Fiji right up until 2009. And of course, under the Bainimarama government in 2009, we in fact got rid of the penal code, and there were many provisions within the penal code that was very limited in its scope, and replaced it with a crimes decree that essentially decriminalized homosexuality. But it went a step further, where the definition, of course, of rape was extended. And so now rape in Fiji can also take place against males. Traditionally, rape was only against women, so women would only get raped. And indeed, even within that sense, rape was only confined to the insertion of the penis in the vagina. But of course now, rape has been extended to, of course, males and females, and rape can take place by the insertion of any objects or any other sort of breaches of the person against whom this particular act has taken place. So this is in fact really been extended in a much wider net. There's a particular case, as you may know, before the courts at the moment, and without elaborating on the merits of the case, there has been murders, for example, that's taken place in Fiji. As Excellency, our President highlighted, that you can have laws, but attitudes also need to change. Attitudes, of course, need to change in our homes, but also needs to change within the different agencies within government too. There was a very famous case in Fiji, as you know, and then the then Commissioner of Police did say, well, you know, you do realize that this person was a well-known homosexual. Somehow the other justifying the actual killing of this person, or somehow the other saying, well, because you're a homosexual, that you may actually be bringing it upon yourself. You leave yourself vulnerable to such acts of violence. And I think this is the attitudinal change that we also, of course, need to think about and talk about within our society itself. Of course, we also related laws that have been put in place, as I highlighted in the crimes decree that has changed, but also the HIV decree that was put in place. Now, of course, our HIV decree has been held to be one of the most liberal laws pertaining to HIV and the manner in which discrimination cannot take place at the extensive range of the law itself. You have to excuse me, I have a bit of a cold. Recently, Parliament also amended the Employment Relations Promulgation. And Section 175 of the Employment Relations Promulgation has also been amended that says the prohibited grounds for discrimination, whether direct or indirect, actual or supposed personal characteristics or circumstances, including race, culture, ethnic or social origin, color, place of origin, sex, gender, sexual orientation, gender identity and expression, primary birth, primary language, economic, social or health status, HIV, AIDS status, etc. It goes on to disability, age, religion, conscious marital status and pregnancy. So the government has also now extended these areas of discrimination even within the employment laws itself. The Attorney-General's conference last year had a session in which we had invited members of the NGO community and various other people interested in this area, because the law obviously is developing in Fiji, specifically regarding LGBTIQ community. And we wanted to look at the new areas where jurisprudence in fact has developed. We have, for example, some very interesting matters before us. There's one particular matter before the court where, and without elaborating too much on it, we have a person who is now a female. He was born, or she was born, a male. And the person is now a female. They have now come to Fiji to change their birth certificate, because at birth he was registered as a male, and he now wants the birth certificate to be changed to say female. The matter is now before the courts because the Registrar of Birth, Deaths and Marriages in fact has taken a different view and has not allowed that. So the argument being, can this take place or not? We of course do not know how the law will be interpreted vis-a-vis Section 26 of the Constitution. So these are new areas where we are looking at the jurisprudence being developed, and it will be of course very interesting areas. Those of you also know that under the Fijian Constitution, notwithstanding the fact that you have Section 26 of the Constitution removing unfair discrimination, the fact is same-sex marriage under the Fijian law is not allowed. And there's a proviso to Section 26(3) of the Constitution. And in our discussions with with the feedback that we received from the wide consultations we had visited about 19 to 22 different locations in Fiji. And I know this may not be specifically the topic of discussion today, but generally what we found that people essentially don't want to discriminate at a philosophical level against people who may be gays and lesbians or transgender. But there was a very strong feeling about marriage. So under the Fijian provision that we have, the law of marriage is still a union between a man and a woman. The argument that has been put forward, of course, is that just because same-sex marriage is not allowed, it does not mean that there is discrimination or breaches of Section 26(3) in respect of other areas of society and social engagements. So the fact is that we are very concerned about a person that should not be assaulted just because they belong to the LGBTIQ community. A person should not have less access to employment, for example, just because they have the LGBTIQ community. So these are the very practical areas that we are looking at. Indeed, in the discussions we had last year in the Attorney-General's conference, we did talk about how there is a need in order for this campaign to really run its full length. There is indeed a need to engage in a very meaningful manner with all the different agencies within government. Of course, there is prejudices, there's no doubt. I mean, if there weren't prejudices, we would not be here today. There are prejudices, but we need to be able to work with those security agencies. One of the commentators at the conference last year did say, well, all the police force are like this. My response to that was, you should not say that, because there are probably members of the Fijian police force who actually are not like that. You should not taint everybody with the same brush. We need to be able to work with these agencies to ensure that people who are not on board become on board. Who knows, there may be homosexuals within those agencies too. And that's the reality. And that could be all very hidden. So the whole point of this campaign from a sort of legal social perspective is that we need to be able to say that the law is there, as His Excellency has said, the law is there, but then how do we bring about the awareness at the everyday level? How do we bring about a particular level of sensitization that is perhaps not existent in certain aspects of our society or certain sections of our society? But ladies and gentlemen, let me also highlight to you a very, very critical issue that I think is very significant. I remember reading some literature when South Africa came out of the apartheid era, and when they were drafting their constitution, as you know that they had two constitutions. One was the transitional constitution, and then they had the actual constitution that is in place now. And when they actually also included sexual orientation in the unfair discrimination provisions, the work that went behind the scenes, and I remember reading some of the literature on this, some of the black activists actually said, we don't want any type of discrimination because we not only confine ourselves to the issue of black and white, discrimination per se is wrong. Discrimination per se is wrong, and that's why we need to have it extended. In the same way, ladies and gentlemen, in Fiji, we have a history of ethnic discrimination. We have a history in Fiji of constitutions being ethnically discriminatory, government policies being ethnically discriminatory. And I have to say this because I think we need to take these sessions and this campaign and deal with the very real issues. When we had the constitutional consultations, I was actually quite flabbergasted that one of the board members of the Fiji rights movement told me that you cannot have equality when you discuss culture and ethnicity. That I found to be quite mind-boggling, because discrimination should be frowned upon, should be illegal across the board. You cannot pick and choose as to where you want discrimination or non-discrimination, because the principle of discrimination means that it applies as wide as possible. This is why you have Section 26(3) of the Fijian Constitution casting such a wide net, because we need to be able to believe in the principle of unfair discrimination on all these grounds before we can progress on any other grounds. We cannot, for example, say that let's not discriminate against a LGBTIQ community, but then we can discriminate on the basis that they may be from a particular province or come from a socioeconomic status, different socioeconomic status, or because they have a different ethnic group or religious group. We should frown upon and should have this whole purposive agenda against discrimination per se. And that, I think, is very, very critical. And this is why I think we're all here today, to be able to tackle those very issues in a very comprehensive manner. Fiji, of course, as you know, has recently, through Parliament, agreed to ratify the United Nations Convention Against Torture. And that is also very important. because it's one of those rights that in fact has been in the Constitution put in place without any provisos whatsoever. You cannot have a proviso to being treated cruelly or inhumanely. And that we are very proud of the fact that we're going to ratify this convention. There's already the Standing Committee has already met on that. Public submissions have been put in place, and we hope to be ratifying that particular provision soon. So I would, in concluding, ladies and gentlemen, because I know you've got a whole range of speakers here this afternoon, I would like to say that the Fijian provision, as far as the law is concerned, is extremely liberal. The feedback that we get when we go into international forums, in fact, some people are quite taken aback by the fact that the 26.3 is very, very wide and is, very, very forward-looking. The trick, of course, now, as His Excellency our President has said, is that we need to bring about the attitudinal changes in society at the everyday level. And that requires engagement from both sides. That requires understanding from both sides, with the sure knowledge that the law is there to protect any form of discrimination and indeed provide free and equal opportunities for people from the LGBTIT community. Thank you very much. Naka.
Yeah, Attorney General.